to be here. I'm happy particularly because we are welcoming here today in this first session Amruta Patil, who has, I think she is a friend in the department. She has visited us before. It was a wonderful visit, short but very intense, where she interacted with the students. So this was in an earlier phase of what Nilanjana described as the CS program, the Center of Advanced Study program. We were able to invite visiting fellows over a number of years. And again, for a rather short visit, too short, we invited Amruta. This is several years ago. And we have always remained in touch, personally, but also in a sense departmentally. She has been an extraordinary friend and well-wisher of the department in all its endeavors. I'd like to say that I first met Amruta in, was it 2010 or 2009 in London. And by that time, actually, I had already read Kari, and I remember that we were in a small group who were all great admirers of Amruta's work. Neil Mukherjee, who had reviewed Kari for Biblio, and he too was very excited to be there and to be meeting Amruta. I had read Kari, and I was also extremely thrilled to be meeting her. And since then, I have followed her work and been introduced to other work in this same genre. But as we all know, the form, I think it shouldn't be called a genre, it's a form. The form is very various, it's very diverse, and Amruta's own work has changed a great deal over a period of time. And what we would like to talk about today, I think, is this growth, the change, the development in Amruta's work, and particularly in its formal aspects, in the technical aspects of what she's putting out there on the page. So not just what brought her to the forum or why she is doing it, because that may be a wearisome repetition of what she's talked about in many such occasions, but rather because she has this set of slides, just taking her through what she is trying to do. So, Amruta, would you like to begin by referring to your pre-Kari work? We have, I deliberately lined up these books here on the table. Two of them are mine. One belongs to my student, Supriya Chaudhuri, who was one of the first to get the book. We pre-ordered it or something, so okay. But let's start with the pre-Kari work and what that led up to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's good to be back for a very specific reason. The last time I was here was in 2011, and I had finished Kari, and to me personally, it felt like I was on the brink of some sort of precipice, because I had made declarations of taking on a beast of a project that I personally didn't have any confidence that I would be able to complete. So it was at that point that I had come here and shared work in progress. So it's special to come back 6 years later in a different capacity. So, I feel like a little bit of a imposter in places like this, because technically and in every other way, I find that people are so much stronger and so much more educated about the world of comics, or the grammar, or the what there is and what one must read. And in many ways, I feel like a little bit of an imposter around these things. What I do know is that from earliest I can remember, I've been writing and I've been drawing. So that's a sketch that I've done when I was 6.5 years old. So it could appear that Sautik and Adi Parva were just meant to be happening, I guess. How to put these two things together, the text and the word? I mean, it was continuously something that was playing with me. Like, it was obvious to me that these two things needed to be stitched together. Earliest attempts were the more predictable ones, where stories were written, which were accompanied. Those of you that are at the back, if you have the option to move forward, it might help you, just because the details may not be so easy to catch from where you are, the first place. So, this, for example, was a story that I've done for Often Stories for Girls. And if you note the page, there is still a reluctance for the illustration to sit tamely in a little rectangle somewhere. It wishes to engage with the page in a way that is more present. It's not just doubling the weight of the argument. It is saying things that the text was not. This is a two-pager that I had done, which was called Freedom to What. It was an Independence Day special thing which had appeared in a Goan daily. And again, working with black and white text and image with like large amounts of text wanting to be on the page and staking their claim over there. I didn't grow up reading comics, and it is really something that I have learned along the way. So in many ways, the earlier work will see a slightly awkward relationship with flow or coherence vis-a-vis text and image. Um, so that was a 20-year-old me, and that was my visual journal when I was working in an advertising agency in Mumbai, which eventually grew to become what is Kari. So the universe is the same, the contents of that book are not. So these are visual journals back in the day which were not meant to be seen by anybody else really. They were mine and I shared them with people that I thought might get it. But please note what's going on. Basically, you don't know what the hell is going on. There are images, there are coded things from my life and my buddies and people that I had secret crushes on that were far more interested in my roommates. And there is Carrie Ann Moss from Trinity, very present. But a great tumble of text and image and a complete absence of ability to control what was happening on the page. Somewhere along the line, Kartika, who's sitting over here, decided to trust Kari enough to make a graphic novel thing out of her. And as the book grew, you can see these are pages of Kari, so they've grown from what you saw in the pages before. Kari uses grayscale, and in some ways that grayscale mirrors the grey that is Kari's state of mind. So small city as you see it is a projection of Kari's own state. It's basically love, a grabby kind of young love. Friendship, reluctance to sit cleanly with the label of sexuality pasted upon oneself. It's not a coming of age book, it's a book about evading labels in some ways. And in some ways, perhaps my own journey continues to be of that. It was a story about friendship, it was about death, most of all, it was about Kari's relationship with this dying character called Angel. And it was about an equation with the urban reality of Mumbai. The Mithi River that sprawls across. Have any of you been living in Bombay? Are you familiar with it? So essentially, if you're traveling by train, the river follows you almost like a snaky trail of smell. You cannot get past that in Mumbai. So Kari engages with the city with as much tenderness and as much consistency as one would engage with the body of a lover. The book remains firmly free.
I found that really fascinating, that final point about the city. And maybe, at this point, I'd just like to ask you a different kind of question about this engagement with the city, which is Kari is a very urban tale and urban story. And there is, there's a terrifying suicide kind of vision, the city spread out below the figure and towards the end of the work. Does that go away at any time from your work, that engagement with the city, or do you think that you just have to go to different things?
It does not go away. One is for the simple reason that people that are highly functional sociopaths tend to be extra alert to physical environments. And I think that Kari's extremely alert and tender relationship with the city has a lot to do with her awkwardness around human beings. So the city remains, but like in Southgate, for example, it's a clash between civilization and forest. So I don't.
This is what I was thinking.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you feel like this is implanted on my memory, I just found it here. So that's the kind of thing I was asking.
It follows, and in a sense, the absolute rejection of that in Southgate, or the desire to remain in a forest, in a way, the urbanness is very present, just in the insistence with which I deny it, basically. So it's anti that in some ways. And the river follows, whether as a stinking sewer or as a...
That's extraordinary. Point about the river having struck. Thank you. I also I'd like to ask, when the post Kari, Amruta you've just said that you were in a bit of a, you've come up against a huge problem of materialization, as it were. You had ideas which you wanted to take your work into a different set of themes or preoccupations. You wanted to experiment more with the form, particularly perhaps with the use of color. You showed us one color image in those sketches for
a couple of them,
not too many. But at that time, I remember we discussed this when you came here, that there was a problem of getting work published, printed. It's very expensive. Publishing a graphic novel, it's not grayscale, it's very, very expensive. You were concerned about that. You were worried about how to sustain this kind of work. What did you do there in that post-Kari phase?
Well, the post-Kari phase had a couple of things. Firstly, it was a thematic thing. I didn't want to repeat myself, which would have been the easiest thing to do, was write more and more and more stories about urban women and Indian women. And maybe I'll come back to that at some point. I wish to. But at that point, I needed to leave it behind. So what I did, I was technically not very strong. I was really not very strong technically, and I knew that. And I was engaging. I got a scholarship to be in France on a writing residency. And what that did to me was really put me in direct contrast with people who were so technically proficient that I became aware of the kind of chasm that existed between them and me technically. But mercifully, I functioned well under these kind of things. So the thing was to just up my game, if I could help it. So what happened was, there's a magazine in Delhi called First City that offered me a space in which I could write a sort of a journal every month, like a visual journal of sorts about what was going on. And this opportunity was my dry runs with color. It was my dry runs with technique. It gave me a chance, like a carte blanche, to try out different sort of things. So I'm just going to share with you the first pages of several things that I did for them. Initially, again, grey, which was all I knew how to work with. As the summer folded in and I visited Provence for the first time, I fell in love with somebody over there for, it was pretty beautiful. And I think that there was something that affected my work in a very palpable way when I was over there. I traveled, again, there's still games going on, testing out different types of handwriting, testing out a running hand. The kind of bobble-headed, animal-headed things that European, it's very present there, they like these sort of things. So, essentially, I was like Mila Jovovich in that film. What's that, fifth element? So shape-shifting, bahurupya, like basically changing skills all the time, changing visual styles all the time, essentially to find something that was more me than other things. So please note, pretty much nothing resembles the other thing, visually. In terms of medium, in terms of color, in terms of layout, it's all continuously switching, like I'm form shifting, shape shifting almost. By now, I was feeling comfortable with color. I was also beginning to use found image for the first time in my work, which would be something that played a role later on. I was talking about things to do with my day-to-day life, stories of others. Like one of the primary problems for me with Kari was it was too close to home and I needed to get away. So these were very much about the other. Even the journals were more about him that I saw, her that I'm imagining a secret life for.
I'd like to ask what happened to Baby Fish, because that was the one that we were following. Now perhaps I don't remember, was it a blog, was it Facebook, but we were able to follow sequences in Baby Fish, because even if I was not directly seeing you, I was able to see a considerable body of work. But I don't remember seeing these ones, Liberal Light. A Baby Fish was the one that I was following. So
Yeah.
what happened to that?
Well, mercifully, not mercifully. Firstly, it was a great magazine, I do miss it, but it folded up. But it folded up well in time because by now I was entering the thick of social media age. And one of the very real risks, and I keep telling this to young people that I meet, is everybody's drinking at too small a pond. Everything everyone's seeing, every object they're wearing, every sanctum doesn't have anything that is secret anymore. So in a way, it was good for me to not be sharing on a week by week basis every single thing thought that crossed my mind. So it worked out well.
Yeah. And these, would you say that they are complete? They were serial. Serial, are they short stories or are they complete? Could they be published later in a kind of print form?
if I become endearing with age, perhaps, but frankly, they're staccato musings more than anything else, of the sort that certain people enjoy, but others would probably find less satisfying. So, Atlantis is pretty okay. It came out in Forbes, I think, and it was an 8-page story. The rest of them are a maximum of 2 pages. They are fairly, in some ways, they speak to later work. So if you look at the earlier work, it is kind of building up to the things that happen in, say, South in many ways. For example, when I did this column, I actually hit upon the style which became my style for Adi Parva and South. At this precise moment, after having tested various things that looked insipid in print, lackluster, wannabe, many things, this was the right note I knew that way for the Parva books. This was another piece that appeared in Open magazine, which I feel very tender about. It's more delicate than my usual style. Also incorporating found image and watercolor illustrations.
That's wonderful. That's those found images in the middle.
Yeah. I feel close about this. And also, I feel like finally the text and the images are sort of sitting well, although they're not following a grid-like thing too strong. They're at ease with one another.
I'd now like to ask you about the way in which you had already, when you came into 2011, you were talking about the Mahabharata. You were saying that this is what I want to do. Again, I'm not quite sure on what forum you shared it, but you did share some sketches and stuff that you were doing. I was able, virtually as it were, to see you working on those large sort of pages. So, when did you finally think that could be started, that it could happen?
I thought I could start it when I was 21 and doing my master's degree, but by the time I was 22 and I'd done 200 images, I knew I was miserably inadequate, I could not do it. So I suspended it and took it up again post-study when I was almost 29 years old.
And here I'd like to say something about the visualization of the Mahabharata or of the Puranas or of the Ramayana for that matter. I think Abhijit started by saying that there is in our culture a fairly strong tradition of these visual tellings of either invented or traditional stories. And all of us, perhaps at least in Bengal, have grown up with this kind of storytelling through pictures, Chobite Ramayana, Chobite Mahabharata. And it was very much a part of our childhood. It was not regarded as a comic book. It's important to recognize that while we were strictly forbidden to read comic books in the American sense, that is to say, we thought of it, or at least our parents thought of it, thought of those as American forms, you had to smuggle them in from school, you get rid of them quickly before your parents notice that you were reading Superman. But for Chobite Ramayana, Chobite Mahabharata, there was no problem. Your Nadu brought them back from the market, from the local market, because they were not sold in bookshops so much as they were sold in the local market, at other kinds of store, general stores, provision stores. And so we did grow up looking and thinking about our history in these rather strange visualizations, because who knows what clothes people wore then? I mean, but there was a kind of form which was encapsulated in these storybook, in these graphic book images. Also, we must remember that great artists, Ganesh Pine, for example, experimented with this retelling of the Mahabharata, particularly. Ganesh Pine, of course, has his Mahabharata series, which he exhibited just a few years before his death. But much earlier, when he was just a struggling graphic artist, he had been done many sketches for telling a full telling of the Mahabharata, particularly. So I think that this is, it somehow falls into a different kind of category. When you started, as you said, when you were 29 and you decided that could happen, that you were then at last ready to make that plunge. Did you think that you needed to get out of the Kari form into some different kind of form?
It was not even an option. I mean, basically these stories were so magnificent and so sprawling and encompassing so much that to sit there with like this stunted, gray and black and these figures that were so blocky and immobile just because I was not capable of doing something else. It was just not, it just didn't feel right. So, in effect, it was important to start working with color. I didn't know how to do that. I have not ever painted before that, except for these little things that were happening with the columns. And some of those columns, I must say, happened simultaneously with the Adi Parva's early sketches. So there was that. Yeah. So basically.
Yeah. But maybe we could just take a look at a few of the images from Adi Parva. And what struck me particularly when I received this book for the first time is that some of it is in that rectangular block format, but a lot of it seems to be trying to get out of there into the full page picture and with a little line of text, but the picture seems to be carrying the weight of the story much.
See, there's two things. Like for me, up until something.
I'll just show you something.
Up until something, pretty much everything that I've done is basically me trying to sort out my own shit. So if people think that Kari looks like me because she's got a horsey face and big brows, I would say that Sautik is as much of a self-portrait as anything else, and so is Adi Parva. So in a sense, to me, these are not Dadu's stories. No Dadu of mine told me these stories. So essentially, to me, they're very, very personal, and some way, Adi Parva was a way to put a distance. So the Supriya character over there is a cool woman who is telling stories in a detached fashion. But Ashwatthama is like crazy bouncing all over the wall. And he's very familiar to me. I know him. You know what I mean? So basically, in that sense, they are everybody's story and still mine.
Could I just ask you one sort of question about source and history? What version of the Mahabharata did you use? I mean, did you just sort of read, was there one text, were there many texts? Did you pick up what you particularly found interesting for the purposes of retelling? What were you doing? Can I just put in a little bit more here? I remember that when I went to see the Ganesh Fine exhibition, and this is towards the end of his life. He had already worked on those smaller sketches. This towards the end of his life, it was quite clear that he had picked out certain themes, certain figures, who for him were really, they carried the message of the Mahabharata. So Ashwatthama was a very, very important figure, Krishna, the Yudhishthira, and those figures were important, and it's just about 8 or 10 great paintings. So what will you do?
I have always been interested in polarities, things that are standing in absolute contrast and basically in most situations shouting at one another, shaking their fist at one another. So if Adi Parva is a blue book, something is red. If one is a fire book, the other is a water book. If one is a female book, the other is male, birth, death. Essentially they are binary, it's like a lot. To me, they come together like a yin and yang in that sense. And choosing the Supriya characters is a very, very wonderful way to instinctively know which of these stories need to be in and which naturally fall out. My personal commitment is to be a person squirreling away beauty, squirreling away things that I thought were beautiful and shiny and were being thrown out and cast out because people were getting angry at some larger whole connected with this lore or with some larger mood that was surrounding Sanatan or Hinduism or whatever. So the aim has always been to be that. In some ways, being a magpie robin, bringing the shiny, beautiful things back home.
Okay. But did you use a Marathi Mahabharata which you had read or you were just using to consult or something?
Supriya, I read everything I could lay my hands on for 3 years. Like everything from Iravati Karve to, Degroy to like basically whatever I could find I was reading, Durga Bhagavad, the Marathi people for sure. But at some point you need to stop reading it, and that's where the tradition of the oral storyteller, which I keep harping on and on about, comes in. Because in some way that gives you the device to break out the hegemony of some version or of some people saying this is the way it is, and this is how the story is told in this version. So that interested me, and that gave me the freedom to, in some ways, not muck about with the code, but take the artistic license that was required for, in this context, telling certain stories to whatever end result, successful or not.
May I also ask you a question about chapterization? Because while Kari doesn't have that kind of chapterization, it has a little bit, but here it's quite marked because there's a shiny, glossy page which marks off, one section. But of course, that is, in a sense, it's necessary for a work like the Mahabharata. Here, this kind of thing. So you have this full page separation, as it were, this red thing. And that's quite marked in something also. So could you tell us something about how you speak of your work as being like a magpie robin, picking up the shiny, the significant episode, bringing it out. But what is the connection? What is the Sutradhar's role in this?
See, the epics lend themselves quite beautifully to this because everybody is continuously interjecting and interrupting each other in the stories to tell minor stories on the side here and there on either side, which are, they sort of do like an alap and then come back to the main thing. So it lends itself to this business of breaking up into short chapters. But also there are other reasons. I myself, my thought process is very staccato. Like it's hard for me to hold on to a vein of thought for extended periods of time. And there is some sort of connection with the poetic that I have felt very strongly. So I try to keep that in the way the things are written and even in the way the things are structured visually. So there is breathing room, you stop, you pause. There are sections which are black and white, which are where the narrators at the present time is unfolding. And there are sections which are full color where you it's all in flashback and you go into alternate worlds. So to me it was important to create these breaks even to allow people to respire in a certain fashion, to breathe and not be, dragged along a story which was going all over the world at breakneck speed.
I like at this point because obviously everybody is very, very interested in your most recent work. So that's wonderful. Would you just say something about it? I think I've seen it.
Yeah, it's in Sikkim.
Yeah,
No, it's near Gangtok. So, the whole thing that has been very important to me is this matter of how people can be primed to be in a certain state of mind because of colors and because of things. Like when you enter a certain space, like a monastery, you are in a very specific visual field, a visual force field of a certain sort. Certain colors are kept around you that do certain things to you. They're very, very sly in what they're doing. It's not by chance. The reds, the way you sometimes feel sleepy in certain settings, sometimes it's hypnotic, sometimes it is many things. So I have been really, really trying to work at making that in my work. And if I had to rely very strongly with text in the past, I'm trying to do it more as a personal experiment, do that more visually now. In this work, for example, one of the feedback I got from Amruta Kumar, I think, Amruta Kumar, the mural person, he had told me that in Adi Parva he felt like he couldn't breathe, that I was just basically hurtling along too fast. So what I did in Southwick was that it's a texty story, there's no way I can get away from that. So I tried to have sections where my Sutradhar almost has like a journal situation going on. He's writing, there are sketches over there, which are basically voices in his head, which fits in perfectly with him because if Ganga is capable and confident of holding court with 30 people around her, Ashwatthama is at ease only talking to two extremely strange outsiders in a space where nobody else wants to spend any time. So I have tried to use this device also.
In fact, that was particularly what I wanted to ask about, because Soptic is a much more adventurous, much more unconventional kind of narrative. On the one hand, you have the dominance of the picture on the page when it occupies usually it occupies the full page. There is none of that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's whole page is taken up by the picture, and it's not compartmentalized into these little rectangular boxes with little bits of the story in them. But at the same time, there is actually quite a lot of text. And that text is also present for you to think about, for you to read, and for you to enjoy other kinds of. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is
double page.
This is a double page. What I try to do within Southik is my frustration with rectangles is very large. I really do not like. I don't like it. So it's in Adi Parva we try to minimize them. In Southik they've just been cast outside the window. They're out. There are no rectangles here except for the form of the book itself. So essentially what we do instead is have divisions that happen organically. So you have a section where Sati and Shiv are sitting in a little grotto in the mountains, and it is the forms of this cave that create the two faces. Or in the case of this image, it is this huge pile of people walking into the maws of death that is creating the division in the page. Or there is a monkey's tail that is spontaneously creating three separate faces in the page. And I've tried to do that because to me it just feels more, and it's very much within the tradition, no? I mean, if you look at the way Rajasthani paintings are, there's like a lot of things going on in one page. You have a sequential thing going on with scarcely any discernible break except for some, innocuous carpet which separates one group of people from the other, So there is an effort to do that as well.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you also about, you said, like journal entries, like the Supriya is as it were, sketching, and sometimes these are like natural history sketches. They're like, here an insect, but later plants. This kind of image is very familiar to us from 19th century botany. So this kind of work brings real diversity to the experience of reading, of going through a book of this kind. And this, would you say it's a reading space, a reflecting space? What kind of space?
My character has gone from being a mainstream person, part of a community of royals, to being a feral animal. He's basically an animal. By the time Ashwatthama enters the story in Southik, he's a person of the forest. And this thing that I talked about, the civilization and the forest, and the more the forests dwindle in the world outside, the more dense and profuse they grow in my text, that has been attempted in the way of this. He's documenting what he knows best, which is not humans anymore, but herbs, things that heal, things that poison, right? Things that need to be burned so that something else can stay alive later on.
So I know that we're getting to the kind of point where we should open this up to the audience and have questions. But I'd like to ask a question on behalf of our book history contingent, of which I was never part, but again, I'm an admirer of their work. So can I ask, does the graphic novel, particularly when it is so close to folk forms, like you mentioned Rajasthani paintings, here we could speak of the Potachitro,
the cover, the wooden cover.
Yes. And of course, so or other kinds of form, and Potachitra is particularly important because it is in scroll form. Would you say that the history of writing and representing has gone on a kind of journey from scroll to codex? That is to say, from the scroll that opens up and sort of continuous kind of experience as you open up the scroll more and more, you see more and more of what is there. And from there to the book, the physical shape of the book, where you have to turn the pages and, each page, you lose the last page when you're looking at that page. Is the graphic book trying to recover some of that experience of the scroll or of the, the larger painting with bits and panels in it, the panels within the larger painting?
I don't have a sense of historicity of these things, Supriya. Basically, what I do know that I'm trying to, in my work, trying to up the mark vis-a-vis complexity. I don't wish to be restrained by this sort of story is too dense to be told in this form, or this is inadequately told in images. That sort of thing I'm not so interested in. I feel that there is something profoundly moving about seeing text and image together. And if I can use it to tell complex stories, that's what I'm aiming ever.
And finally, and that's why I want to open it up to the audience now, what is the reader doing? The reader, viewer, what is the function of that figure for whom this story is being told, who in an oral tradition would be right there present before you and you could see their responses, you could speak to them directly, there might be interjections, there might be somebody pointing out something that you yourself had not emphasized so much. Here, because this is a printed work, because very unfortunately we have, gone beyond the oral, yet you are very, very
in a way,
wedded to
running
oral
counter to the
tradition.
whole.
Yeah. So, what is the reader, viewer do?
I should ask them, no?
Yeah.
It's always a bit, to me it's terrifying because I know that my work has shifted form so much that the ones that felt affinity to book 1 don't necessarily feel an affinity to book 3, and so on and so forth with the different works. So it's not very good for your sense of security, but I think that's perhaps a good thing for a person making work that you're not making safe work that you're sure everybody is going to agree about. So I don't know, I'd like to know. In fact, I'd be happy to have a conversation about this.
So, not being safe, going beyond the boundaries of safety to an unknown relationship with your unknown readers and audience. Can we ask the people here who are fortunately present with Amruta today to respond, to ask questions, and to clarify what needs clarification? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Long is for a reason. So
Yeah, well, actually, I don't know how you're doing with time. How are you doing with time?
It's okay. Yeah, we started a bit late.
So, I don't like white page. So, I have problems starting on any blank page always. So, the way to deal with that is I started off just sticking random things on the pages and then pasting on top of them. So, a lot of my work is in fact very layered because it allows me to make a start. So, this, for example, is a monkey page when it first started, which is scraps of various things pasted together. I also, because I'm a newbie around painting, I work with acrylics, which is not the most romantic medium on the planet, but it has its advantages, and in post and pre-production, it allows many people's paws to touch your work without you having a hard fade. So essentially, it's a very forgiving medium also. So I'm emphasizing on visuals this much because all of you already know a great deal about the literary aspect of this stuff, huh? Just to put that in perspective. So, for example, the image that you see on the left and the image that you see on the right are in effect the same page, before and after. So you have a very frightening, sinister Draupadi turning into this creature of coy smile and pomegranate and rose and stuff.
it's the same image.
It's the same image. I don't throw anything away. Every single, which is why the quality control is dodgy. So, what I started doing when I became more comfortable is I started just, instead of sticking things and making it dimensional, which is a nightmare to scan, I just started painting the page blue or like some base color and then working on top of that so that it was not a white page, essentially. I started also using a lot of found image and collage. Because why should one reinvent the wheel? There are so many beautiful objects just begging to be appropriated and made beautiful, but also because I like the connect to the contemporary visually there in my work. I like things to be from suitably frivolous, fashion magazines and stuff to be there in stories about epics and gods and goddesses. I get a little bang out of that. This is an image that used a lot of collage. In Adi Parva, I found that the collage images were the strongest, so I just used more of them in Southwick. Southwick, I have to give a disclaimer, my artwork is much more bright. So the book is beautifully produced but darker in tone than my work is. So that has to be factored in. This image, I do a lot of visual odes to things that I feel close to. This is a relief from Angkor Wat. So there's plenty of this sort of thing which it's not plagiarism. I deeply want you to notice, and I would like you to join the dots with some of this stuff. Here is me being a bit cheeky. This is Draupadi emerging with her twin brother from the fire. Essentially, the fire is a yoni, and they're both emerging out of it. So there's a bit of O'Keefean stuff happening, but very quietly overlaid with text in the final. Blood and flowers, So essentially, if flowers are also a thing of romance and dancing and Raslila, in my images, the most terrifying scenes are also ones where corpses are replaced by petals of flowers that I found outside my door. Um, this is the box thing I was talking about. Also, I started working with eye flow in a different way. So rather than, I want you to look at certain things. So there's certain mathematical formulae that almost come into play without me knowing my ass to my elbow. So it's like the golden mean spiral that comes there, and even if you look over here, your eye is being drawn with Draupadi's sari to do a certain sort of a trajectory. So that sort of thing I've tried to do more and more. Um, Here too, this is my Bhagavad Gita as it appears in Sautik, where essentially the Gita is reduced to a single page of great tenderness, almost a homoerotic tenderness of the two of them looking at each other in eye lock, and essentially it says he knelt in the dust and they had a very quiet conversation. So we have not talked about the micro subversion, but there have been attempts to stay with the iconography and stay with the lore and even visual, like you see the Gaja Lakshmi, it's one of the most present iconographic things that you see all over the country. But there's minor things that have been tweaked. Like, are you familiar with the imagery of Gaja Lakshmi? This is Lakshmi being bathed by 4 cardinal elephants. And typically she looks pretty stiff and not very happy to be there. So what I've done, I've used this story as a parallel to my Draupadi being wedded to multiple men sequence. And to me, this Gajalakshmi is very much a mistress of the moment. She wants to be where she is, and she's inhabiting her skin very confidently, and she's sensual, and there is that going on. So this sort of little stuff is continuously happening with visuals and their original references. Yeah. Vis-a-vis text, it's like a jeweler's job. I have a script of about 350 pages, which was honed in 30 typed pages of text, which is what is there in my book, possibly less than that even. So, not that the text is irrelevant, but I've really tried to make it as tight and as precise and as arrow-like as I can. So that's my ramble on this.
Other questions? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned that you've been inspired by, I would say louder. You mentioned that you have been inspired by various folk art forms. Did I get that correct?
Pretty much, yeah.
Right. And also what intrigued me that you mentioned that you do not like pigeonhole boxes. You like breaking the gutter space between the panels. And Japanese manga is a tradition that has been doing it for quite some time now. So I just wanted to ask a simple question. Do you like reading manga, or have you been inspired by that form at any point of time in your career?
You know, I personally feel more kinship to Blade than to graphic novels. Does that make sense?
Had another question maybe leading on.
Two quick things. One is the beginning that you didn't grow up with comic books. That seems rather strange, and I want to
How much is it I'm thinking? I grew up in Vasco da Gama and Goa, so there's a bit limitation of resource in early 80s, usually what you could find.
And the second one was this is something that comes through very obviously when you speak. First of all, I'm a big fan of your work. So I must say it's thrill to be able to listen to you. This business of self-referentiality. I mean, every panel of yours seems to be talking that about itself. Certainly every page, if not every panel. Where does that come from?
Boy, I don't know. I guess, I mean, if I'm getting your question right, a lot of it has to do with my fundamental approach about mythology is that it is only worthwhile if it is psychologically useful to you or if you can see parallels in your psychological self. So if there is a lot of that going on, perhaps that ontological aspect is what is driving that. I'm not sure I'm answering your question right.
Look, yes, there are two here. Was there somebody in the back there? No. So yes, please.
The Samudra Manthan sequence,
In Adipur.
In Adipur.
Sorry. So there is this, so just like how you introduced Angkor Wat and you said that it's a sort of, there is a resemblance there in the style. When I was looking at those pages, it sort of looked very much like a geological map or something which you look at from above to see certain landmarks. And in the text there is mention of there were certain things which spilled when the ocean milk was being churned. So was the whole thing a sort of sort of reference to oil spills and toxic. And
There is ceaselessly references of that sort going on. There is.
the whole thing was looking like a satellite shot of a problem area in a
Yeah.
Was that?
That's not by coincidence.
If these references come very kind of instinctively, or are they kind of deliberately planned or something like that?
Someone paint by looking at some of these people's work. Like literally, I have learned to paint by these things. So if there was Frida marking the earlier work, it's moved to Odeon Redon and Pierre Bonnard and Diego Rivera. In fact, I like switched spouses by the end of this journey. So there is definitely that, and they're there, and I would like them to be there. There's Rousseau's forests and Gauguin and the earlier works. Yes.
Amruta Shergill, do you think at all?
Amruta Shergill, perhaps? I don't think so, actually.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
Maybe this is a silly question, but look at the murals of, for example, in Shantiniketan where you have murals by Nandalal, by Vinod Bihari, some of those larger panels. So, especially the one which you said, Unfold God. There's so much like the Kashi sort of thing by.
There's a lot, yeah. There's even Hanuman from Pattachitras is there, as is a full, playful, sweet, golden langur glory, So,
No, I was just thinking about the certain.
there are countless references.
Murals,
Not specifically those that I can think of.
No, but I didn't mean it specifically, I meant it as a.
There's somebody at the back there. You talked about editing the text.
Yes. It's very brutal, na? I mean, like, even for a loving publishing house, they're not going to publish a 700-page graphic novel quite as yet, coming from me. So there are practical limitations to that. And there's also, since my image doesn't say what is in the text, it was very important not to be ham-handed, because my text can be a little bit read aside, perhaps a bit heavy-footed sometimes, a bit pompous sometimes, and hopefully the playfulness of the image decimates that, So there's always an effort to play between these things, where there is something being said in a certain tone, it will not have a visual that has the same tone, it will be markedly more playful, or markedly more irreverent, or something else. So it's continuous backward, and the lapidary is the closest example that I can think of as such things happen. Picture.
Watermarks, they have faded, and are they kind of sort of delivered palimpsests, or is it a typo with my book?
No, it's meant. Something as banal as a flyer that I found that morning, which I chose to use as a backdrop for my work, and I just kept some of it visible to mark the moment in my life. Which is all sorts of stuff. Or like, for example, the sequence in Sautik where Dushasan is dragging Draupadi by the hair across the carpet. That is actually an image of Saddam Hussein's palace taken from Time magazine. So not that anybody needs to know that, but it's there. Should one ever find the original image.